Services Marketing, MKT625. Lecture number 31.
Assalamu alaikum Khawateen Hazrat. This is Wasim Ahsan, your instructor for the course Services Marketing MKT625 at the Virtual University of Pakistan. I welcome you all to lecture number 31. In the previous lecture, I was talking about the motivational model of job characteristics. The reason I was talking about that because we were done with the design and implementation of the job design. What is a job design? It basically is a collection of so many different jobs to be performed by different people. In order for people to effectively and very efficiently execute their jobs, we have got to see to it that those jobs have the right characteristics, and we've got to understand those characteristics. The understanding and appreciation of those characteristics let us managers as providers to come up with the right analysis when it comes to developing the contents of the jobs and relationships between different support and front line personnel working for the organization. The meaning, when people are working for the organization and delivering services, the contents of their jobs have got to be so clear in their minds that there is no confusion in terms of execution of the delivery of the service. The contents of the job must not confuse the delivery of the service, and therefore everything must work very smoothly and efficiently. The reason we look into the motivational model is because we have to consider the 5 different areas which affect the contents of the job, and hence the motivational level of people, meaning the job holders who are performing those jobs. Different characteristics could have different levels of the motivating power. Some have a higher level of motivation and others could have a lower level of motivation. It is because of the inherent characteristics and nature of different jobs. Like I told you, there are certain jobs like that of a telephone operator which is very low on identity, because all he or she does is convey the messages and connect people with each other, and that is just about it. It is identifiable because the unit of work is such that you can define that very easily, but there is not much substance to it when it comes to considering the content of the job. Therefore, the motivating power or the levels of the motivation which job holders derive out of the characteristics of the job contents are the ones which have to be understood in absolute clarity. You will recall that I did talk about 2 of those. The one is the skills variety, and for the purpose of a brief recap, let me tell you the essence of these 2 the characteristics. Skills variety is all about the variety of skills which the people have in order to exhibit the inseparability in the first place of the operations or the job at hand. People who form the frontline component or the on-stage component of any services organization have got to have complete mastery of that inseparability, and that is the one skill which is extremely important because they've got to exhibit that they are good operations people as well as good marketing people. And the demonstration of the mastery of this characteristic of inseparability is something which really convinces the customers. Customers do not really know that the concept is known as inseparability, and what is it that they have to do in order to bring the 2 functions of operations and marketing together. All they care about is the efficiency with which they are served. So in order for providers to serve their customers very efficiently, they've got to demonstrate that mastery. Another the skill as part of the skill variety is their listening and speaking skills, because they've got to leave a lasting impression on their customers so that those customers can come back to the company again and again. And they've got to be able to deal with different kinds of customers who could be soft, could be hard, difficult, arguing type, so on and so forth. And these people could also have to have the ability to empathize with their customers, because especially when providers have complaints and customers could walk into the facility with complaints, registration of the complaint before the complaint is addressed and resolved is extremely important. People like to see those providers who really can empathize or identify themselves with the problems and thoughts of customers who think they are in trouble and could have passed through a certain level of misery. That's the way they perceive their situation, and they expect complete, total empathy in that particular situation. And the frontline employees of any services organization have to have the ability to demonstrate that they really can empathize with their customers. The other component of the services the setup, meaning the support component or the offstage component, is the one which may not really have a lot of opportunities to display different kinds of the skill varieties, for the simple reason that they are part of the support staff and they are busy executing those operations which form the basis of the support and help to the frontline people. And therefore, like I told you, there's not much that the providers can do to develop their skill variety. However, one of the things which really happens to be extremely significant is cross-training. These people working for the organization as support staff can be trained into different areas of the same operation or different operations. For example, a person who is working on assembling the sandwich can be used for some other job in order to bring in a certain level of motivation and to give the person the impression that he's being trained for doing something else also. So support staff do not really have the opportunity of displaying those skills. However, they certainly have an opportunity of being extremely good at their functions so that they can support the front end staff in just about the most efficient manner. It is the total teamwork which is at its peak when a service is delivered in the most efficient manner. The front-end people are a reflection and a representative of the organization, no question about that. But then the support which they get from the support staff or the off-stage or backstage component really matters, and without that, they really cannot be as effective as they might seem to be. So apart from cross-training, what else could be done is, if you can spot the good talent from within the backstage component, you always can pick that and put that into the front-end staff of the organization. And this is where the significance of the concept of this cross-training really comes in. And I would like to relate this with the job enlargement and also the job enrichment when I talk about a couple of more characteristics of this motivational model. The other characteristic is that of the job identity, and that is the degree to which the person think his or her the job is measurable as an independent the work unit. And I give you the example of a telephone operator or somebody working within a call center or working for a bank and happens to be an online banker. So depending upon the nature of their jobs, you can measure and you can assess the different levels of the job identities. Like I said, it is something very inherent in the job that the one job is highly identifiable and the other one is not as highly identifiable. The basic responsibility of the managers is not to make the one job more identifiable, because it is something very inherent. You cannot make the job of the telephone operator more identifiable than it really is. What you really can do is enlarge that job. If you think that the operator has the ability, or if you think that the job of the telephone operator within your organization is not really very hectic and the load of work is not something that justifies the existence of the telephone operator, you may like to enlarge that job and assign a few additional functions or jobs to the telephone operator. So that is something which you as a manager can do, meaning enlarge the job, cannot really change the identity of the basic job itself. You really can bring about a change in the identity by enlarging the job. That is my point at the moment. The next the characteristic of the motivational model is that of task significance. Now, this is the degree to which the one worker may think his or her job has an impact on the jobs of others. The jobs that are significant are the ones which also are high on identity. Or in other words, the jobs which are high on identity also generally happen to be very significant. The job of a plumber is very significant, and it also is high on identity. The job of the one who receives the call for the plumber to come to his house is not very highly identifiable. However, it can be made more identifiable if the person taking the telephone calls also has the authority and the power to schedule the work of different plumbers who go in so many different directions. So it all depends on the job design and the nature of service that you are selling, which dictates the importance and the need to make one particular job more significant or less significant, or develop the relationship between two different jobs, of which the one is highly significant and the other one is less significant. It is generally said that the people who think their jobs are very significant work harder because they really involve themselves with their jobs in the hope that the outcome is going to be of very high significance. When a plumber knows that fixing a problem is going to give relief to his customers, it is something which gives him a sense of accomplishment. And by the same token, the people who go to different places fixing the air conditioning systems in very hot seasons are the ones who come back with the very high sense of accomplishment because they have fixed somebody's problem. Now, what is important for the management is to see to it that the jobs that are very highly significant are not really error prone, because that is where the need for recovery might arise. And as good managers, they have to see to it that there is no need for recovery. But knowing that any good service with the best of intentions in the world can run into certain problems, the recovery strategies have got to be in place. Or in other words, the mechanism for implementation of those strategies has got to be handy, and it has to be there with certain standards so that whenever the need arises, people can fix the problem and recover what went wrong. And another thing which the managers should look into the importance and the need for cross-training on those jobs which are very highly significant. Highly significant jobs are the ones which lead to outcome apparent to the customers. Customers could look into the outcome in relation to the quality which is delivered, and therefore the people who execute jobs which are highly significant have to be trained in so many different variety of skills. And this is what I was talking about just a few moments ago. The need for cross-training presents itself because such people are the ones who form not only the significant part of the operation, they also happen to be the one who are the frontline people of the organization. Just look at these plumbers or electricians, the air conditioning mechanics and so on and so forth, who come to your place of residence or work representing their company. As far as you are concerned, as customers, they are the front-end people, and they are the ones who are going to perform their jobs carrying very significant contents. And therefore, the outcome which you are going to have is something which is going to be the result of their efforts. And therefore, there is a tremendous need for cross-training for these people to have different kinds of abilities. it is generally said that the cross-training is much better than having additional people who companies might like to employ as the backup, only because they think that the certain parts of the job or jobs are extremely significant. They should have more people lest they run out of good people. Well, that is a good philosophy, but then at the same time it is better if you really can cross-train different people for different kinds of jobs to come up to the expectations of your customers. And that really is the essence of this characteristic of the motivational model. So looking at it from the perspective of management, what is important is to understand and analyze their significance so that we can put together different jobs in a proper perspective, which gives us the most appropriate job design. Do not lose sight of the fact that we are still talking about the job design as part of the service design. I started talking about the service design like 4 or 5 lectures ago, and we still are in the process of discussing the same. And the fact is that once I'm done with the job design and this the motivational the model of characteristics, and then with service standards, we are going to be then fully done with the job design. And therefore there is a need for us to be very attentive to all the aspects and dimensions of the job design. Here, as you know, we are talking about the significance of the characteristics of the motivational model of different kinds of jobs so that the contents of the jobs could be put in a proper perspective, just like I said a few moments ago. Let us now talk about the next characteristic, which is autonomy. The autonomy basically is the degree to which somebody feels the freedom or the discretion to execute one's job. If one feels that one really has the freedom and discretion to do one's job in the way one wants, then one thinks one's job contains a high level of autonomy. Now, what are the jobs which carry high level of autonomy, and what are the ones which do not really carry high level of autonomy? I think you will agree with me if we go back to the operational positions, you will immediately know that the position of cost efficiency does not carry jobs which have high level autonomy, for the simple reason that those jobs have got to be highly standardized and they've got to be part of an industrialized process in which there cannot be too much autonomy. As a matter of fact, in which there cannot be any autonomy at all. Anything which is being done has to be done in a repetitive manner every time it is done. However, if you opt for the position of customization or service quality on quality dimensions, then you are talking about different jobs which could be very high on autonomy. Now, when we talk about those jobs in the areas of different kinds of consultancies, we certainly talk about jobs carrying high level of autonomy because those jobs are executed by high level professionals. People generally like to have their own work schedules and they want to have the freedom of movement, and you cannot give this freedom of movement and the liberty to have their own schedules unless they are dealing with those jobs or executing those jobs which really are extremely identifiable, extremely significant, and which can be enriched or which already are enriched. So in other words, here, when we talk about autonomy, there's a great correlation between the concept of job enrichment and autonomy. You give autonomy on those jobs which really are enriched or you want to really enrich. And when you enrich a job, you know what you do. Well, there are 3 or 4 different elements that you really have to keep into a serious consideration while you enrich a certain job. And you will recall that you would like to have your employees to have a certain level of freedom to experiment different kinds of models to come up with a better outcome of the service. And this is something which you cannot delegate to those who are performing functions which could be identifiable and also significant, but do not really warrant a high level of autonomy, meaning those jobs and tasks which are part of the cost efficiency the operational position. And therefore, you like to have your people to respond to emerging situations in a specialized way by using their own judgment. And this is where the level of autonomy comes in. And this is an important element of job enrichment, which I talked about, I think, a couple of lectures ago, that you give this kind of liberty and freedom to your employees in order to empower them so that they can be responsible for the acts and their deeds. And you make people responsible for the acts and deeds, meaning you make them responsible to measure their own performance, to assess their own performance if they have a certain level of autonomy and if they are executing a high level of job. And for that, you also may like to train them. So here, we also can draw a correlation between the need for cross-training and the level of autonomy which we want to give on one particular job. So all I'm saying is when you are analyzing a job, or when you are designing a job in the first place, you have to be aware of the built-in or the inherent level of autonomy which should come with that particular job. And if you happen to be working in a setup which does not really approve of a high level of autonomy on those jobs which happen to be very enriched, or jobs which you think should be enriched, then you must start thinking in terms of autonomy. And when you think in terms of autonomy, you must think of the elements which I talked in relation to job enrichment. People have got to be motivated to start experimenting different kinds of models that may work to give them better outcomes of the service they are delivering. That is one. And number two, the people have got to have the flexibility of responding to situations in a specialized way by using their judgment. Now, this is something which is to be underlined, by using their judgment. Instead of running back and forth, between the different bosses, the people have got to have the authority and the power to look into the situations by themselves and correct those situations or improve those situations. And this is where the continual improvement of the quality process really comes in. And this is something which forms one part of the quality management. And the third element is that of training, which I just indicated a few moments ago. Such people also have got to be trained. If people are performing high-level jobs which carry autonomy or which should carry autonomy, it does not automatically mean that these people do not really need any kind of additional training. The answer is they do need additional training all the time because of the new concepts that creep into the business world and the upcoming newer needs and situations to which you as providers could have to respond. So you've got to learn newer things every day that passes by and train your people, especially those people in the first place who also happen to be empowered people, meaning empowered employees. This is a concept which is becoming very popular in the modern day management, meaning the concept of empowerment. And it just so happens that I've had the opportunity of talking about empowerment in relation to job enrichment and the level of autonomy as one of the characteristics of the motivational model of job content. So, in other words, when you are taking a look at the job on the blueprint, you should be looking at different jobs in the light of the characteristics that I have just talked about. And coming back to the point of autonomy, which I am going through, you must look into all those contents of different jobs which require autonomy and try to build it right there into the job content so that you are in a position to come up with the right job description. So just look at the interface this particular aspect has with the jobs on the HR side. HR, the people become active here because of this interface, because they have to develop the rightmost job descriptions for the people performing jobs on which we are talking of the high level of autonomy. So this is not to say that the HR people come into contact only on those jobs which are high in autonomy. They are the ones who develop job descriptions for every kind of job. All I'm saying is, with the help of this description, that the interfaces are to be developed, the relationships are to be identified and then established with the help of the practice which you undertake when you are developing a service, or when you are handling and managing a service design. This could be something absolutely new, fresh, or this could be something refreshed, meaning something which is undergoing a process of redesigning. And a redesigned service can also have, and in most of the cases does have, the characteristics and variables of a new service. And you will recall I gave you the example of the fast food service. Just imagine a fast food restaurant getting into the drive-through window or starting the direct delivery service whereby they can deliver food at the place of your residence or work. It is going to have different mechanics altogether, and it demands different jobs, new jobs with different contents altogether. And this is the beauty of referring back to the blueprint again and again, and thinking and analyzing the jobs from so many different angles, not only from the point of view of the content, but also the relationships and the execution, the delivery mechanism, and the standards which you establish in order to make sure that service is delivered right every time and each time, and in the first place, the very first time. So there are so many different dimensions to the service design which you look into when you are handling the job design. Back to this the motivational model. It is the responsibility of the management to look into all those aspects which make it important for them to either enlarge jobs or to enrich jobs when they are dealing with the question of autonomy. Autonomy should be given on those jobs which happen to be enriched. Whether they are already enriched or should be enriched are the ones which also call for autonomy. And I've talked quite very much in detail about the relationship between autonomy and job empowerment. The next characteristic of the model is feedback. Feedback is the degree of information which an employee gets from his superiors about the performance on the job. Meaning how that person is performing, he must know. And the feedback is something which should not be held back only until the time when there's a complaint within the company. No. You must make it a regular practice to give a certain level of feedback to all the employees. May those be the part of the on-stage component, or may those be the part of the backstage component, about the way they are performing their jobs, because that is something which really motivates them, especially when they find out that they are doing their jobs in just about the appropriate way. And in case they are not carrying out their jobs the way it is prescribed, they have to be informed of that as well, because corrections could have to be made. And if they are not performing the jobs right, there are bound to be certain complaints. And that's what I said, that feedback should not be held back only up to the point when complaints start coming in. No, you have to give a level of feedback to your employees about the way they are performing their jobs. And that is something which also prepares them for the better behavior in future, because when they find out they are doing well on their jobs, they find it motivating. And the feedback, the characteristic also is something which has to be built into each and every job, regardless of the level of identity, significance, or autonomy. This is something which has to be an inherent feature of each and every job. It is the responsibility of the management to establish and determine to what extent feedback is to be given to their employees and when it is to be given. It could be after a standardized kind of an interval, or it could be given impromptu, meaning whenever the company thinks it is important. These are the characteristics of the motivational model, which I started talking about in the previous lecture. And the reason that we get into this model is that we have to establish the levels of the motivation which different characteristics could offer. And we have learned that there are certain characteristics which make certain jobs more motivating than others. And when it comes to the inherent features of those particular jobs, there is not much the managers can do about that, because the motivating jobs remain motivating, and those which cannot motivate as much remain less motivating. But the job of the management is to see to it that they can create certain balances, and those balances can be brought about by job enlargement, by job enrichment, and also by maybe simplifying certain jobs. If certain jobs could happen to be kind of complex, if they are too heavy on significance and identity, maybe the management decide to chop that particular job into different smaller jobs and make adjustments among different jobs. And those adjustments, of course, are done in that particular situation by enlarging certain other jobs. So in order to keep your people motivated, you have to be very sensitive to the aspect of the balance that you must try to maintain while you design a service. Let me now summarize this motivational model with the help of a graphical presentation. As you can see from this model, the very first block relates to the job characteristics, and these are the ones that I have tried to explain to you, starting with skill variety, task identity, going down to task significance, to autonomy, and to feedback. These are the 5 characteristics which managers must consider while they are developing different jobs as part of the service design, because there are certain jobs which require skill variety, and there are certain jobs which inherently carry significance in terms of their character, and those also happen to be quite high on identity. This is what we have learned, and we also have learned that the jobs which are highly identifiable also happen to be very significant. They may also demand, in certain cases, a certain level of autonomy, and the concept of job enrichment and job empowerment is the one which I've tried to relate with the level of autonomy which certain jobs must carry. And it is your job as managers to establish which are the jobs that should carry autonomy. While managers work for their organizations, they are just about the right people to decide, and this is something which should be decided not by just one person, but rather should be an outcome of a team effort where different people can make their inputs, and those inputs have not to be made under the pressure of a boss that requires one certain kind of output. This is something which I would like to underline here, not something which is the result of a group think. Group think is a concept in which the people tend to make decisions which may not be the best decisions for the organizations, because those have been made by the group under a certain level of pressure, by not objectively assessing the overall situation which can go toward the benefit of the organization. Now, this is a very sensitive issue, and all I'm saying is that it is the result of a very objective teamwork that the company decides the level of autonomy to be defined for certain jobs, and then The fifth characteristic of this model is the feedback which should be given to employees in order to keep them alive and keep them alive to the inputs that they are making toward the execution of the operation, because it only will have a positive impact and not a negative one. It will have a negative impact only if people do not even know how they are performing. Well, once we are clear about the five characteristics of the motivational model of jobs, we should be very clear in our minds that these characteristics lead to certain psychological states on part of the employees. Now, what are those states? Those states are that the people start realizing the meaningfulness of work. And keep in mind, the people do realize and appreciate the meaning of their work when they're told so. In other words, the bosses have got to be the better leaders who can share this kind of important information with their employees. And before talking about the results which the employees give to the organization, the leaders have to talk about the importance of the jobs that people are performing. In other words, the people have got to be told how important their contribution is toward the achievement of the overall goals of the organization. And this is where the relationship-oriented leadership comes into the equation. I have no intention to go into the details of the characteristics of leadership styles. All I'm saying is that this is a psychological state where people really start appreciating the meaningfulness of the work. They develop a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment, and that happens only when they are continuously informed of the inputs they are making and the outputs they are generating for the benefit not only of the organization but also of the customer. So the result is that the sense of involvement escalates, and with that escalation, the highest possible level of interest gets aroused on part of those employees who are part of this setup. And with that, there are certain outcomes which could be seen in the third block, which I'm now going to show you as outcomes. I think it is obvious that when the people are going through the very positive kind of psychological states, those will lead to high motivation, high performance, and high satisfaction. High motivation on part of the employees because they are highly motivated to execute their jobs to the best of their ability because of the factors that I've just talked about. And their performance will be the optimal performance because of, again, the factors I've talked about. And the net result will be that customers are going to be highly satisfied customers. And that is the most important goal of services marketing. And I think that we have learned this factor by now pretty much convincingly. So with the help of this model, we really can determine as to how to motivate our people, because we know the service design and we know the different jobs and we know the different levels of motivation inherent in different jobs. And wherever we think that we have to bring about certain adjustments, we can do that. We can simplify jobs, we can enlarge jobs, and we can enrich jobs. That is the beauty of the understanding and appreciation of the motivational model of jobs. With that, we come to the next topic, which is of standards. So in other words, we're not yet done with the service design. The last element that we have to take into consideration while we come up with just about the rightmost service design is the standards. What are the standards and who defines those standards is going to be the topic of this learning. And let me tell you, after we have developed the understanding about customers' expectations and the service design and so many different associated concepts that I've been talking about, the establishment of standards is something which really has to come as kind of a capstone, because it is so important to have these standards without which we just cannot offer the right quality of service. What is important about standards is that these should not be established by the company, meaning that these should always be established from the customer's point of view. As a matter of fact, experts go to the extent of saying that standards within an organization have got to be the customer-defined standards. How do we achieve customer-defined standards? I'm going to talk about that. But before let me tell you what really standards are. Standards basically are the behaviors and actions on part of the providers which they execute or perform in order to more effectively deliver in a standardized manner a particular service to their customers and to the satisfaction of those customers. Anything which is done in just about the same way or in about a way which is defined by the customer, which really falls on the quality parameters as perceived by the customer, is something that must form the basis of standards. More on this later. There are certain problems and challenges that companies face while they try to come up with standards. Now, this is not to say that none of the companies have standards. As a matter of fact, some of the companies have beautiful standards, and we all learn from them. When we talk about these problems and challenges, these are the ones which are faced by and large by those companies that really are not good at establishing standards. And like I said earlier, standards are the ones which have to be defined from the customer's point of view. Let us look into all those problems and challenges which companies face before they really can come up with the kinds of standards which customers like and expect. Well, the very first challenge is that of the operational position, and especially when companies opt for the position of cost efficiency and high productivity. This position is defined from a commercial point of view because we have to cut costs and we have to achieve the highest possible efficiency and so on and so forth. And while we do that, we have a tendency to kind of ignore the customer side. And experts maintain that the standards which are established by the company should not be defined only from the standpoint of a particular operational position. Those have to be established as defined by customers. How do we take that into account from a customer's standpoint is something that I'm going to talk about a little later. The second challenge which is rampant in services is that of inseparability. Not every company is a master of executing their jobs in a highly inseparable manner. So in other words, this remains a challenge which so many companies still have to deal with and still have to surmount. In other words, what I'm saying is companies are not in a position to perform the jobs of operations and marketing and sales at the same time in a very efficient manner. And they still have certain levels of conflicts which show themselves here and there, and because of which companies cannot really come up with standards. They maintain that the people are used to working in one particular way, and because of the established norms of behavior and patterns of work, it is very difficult to change that behavior. And therefore, we are constrained to have the kind of standards which experts maintain should be there. The other area where companies really find standards difficult to establish is the area of customization. Companies, meaning providers, could maintain because of the customization, meaning because of coming up with a different solution every time for a different customer, it is very difficult to have standards. And they've got a point to see when they are dealing with studies like management, financial, legal, medical, and so on and so forth. But then at the same time, the experts could maintain that there have to be a certain level of standards on those behaviors and actions which really can be standardized. If everything within the total task cannot be standardized, there have to be certain parts which should be standardized. And those are the parts which can be standardized in a very qualitative manner. Even if it cannot be standardized in a quantitative manner which can be measured, it should be standardized in a qualitative manner. Experts also say that the companies do not really have to be extremely rigid when they find themselves in this kind of a situation, and at the same time they maintain that we cannot live without standards. After having talked about these challenges, it becomes very clear that we have to have standards in place, and the standards that we have in place are of two different kinds. The one is the hard standards and the other one is the soft standards. And this is what I was talking about in relation to the customization position, where we are constrained to have hard standards, but we really can go for soft standards. Establishing soft standards as customers define is more difficult than establishing hard standards. What those standards are and how do we go about those, I will talk about that in a moment, but before that, let me tell you how should we go about making the first attempt of putting standards together and then improving those. Well, in the first place, when you are coming up with the blueprint and you are very clear about the service and job designs, and you also have defined the job content side of it, meaning all that we have learned so far, you should be in a position to know where something can go wrong and where is it that we have to have certain standards of delivery, where is it that we have to have a proof of delivery, and where is it that where we might have to stage some recovery. Once we know that, because we are the ones who have defined the whole service and developed the whole service, we really can come up with all those matters which should be very important to customers, meaning that we as providers have to look at the whole thing from the customer's perspective. Once we have done that, we can come up with what you may call, or what the experts call, a quality index. And that quality index is a collection of all those points where you as providers need to measure the performance of your employees, and where customers also like to measure the performance of your employees. And that is where you deliver the service. For example, if you do not deliver the service on time, that is going to be against the measure that you might have established. Now, that is something that you established by yourself, looking at the whole thing from a customer standpoint. You can further improve that when customers start complaining about it. So the quality index which you should come up with is a collection of all those points which you can think from a customer's perspective, and all those points which are pointed out to you by the customers. And that is why we have to get into the market research studies like complaints solicitation and critical incident studies and serve call and trailer calls and so on and so forth. Because with the help of all these studies, we can really trace all those factors responsible for either customers' satisfaction or dissatisfaction. So all those points which form the basis of satisfaction and dissatisfaction have to be taken into that index, and you come up with a long list of all those things which are responsible for satisfaction and dissatisfaction, and you keep on improving that list and expanding that list, like I said earlier, on the basis of the complaints that you receive from customers. Now, this is not to say that you do not come up with the quality index until the time you start receiving complaints or until the time you start soliciting complaints. You should, in the first place, come up with that index on the basis of the design that you have put together. You have put together that design because you're experienced in that field, or you have done a lot of work in that field before kicking off the service practically, and therefore you should be the one to look at the whole thing from customer standpoint. Just in order to make foolproof, you wait until the time those complaints start coming in and you improve the index. Back to the hard standards and soft standards. Well, the hard standards are the ones which can be easily measured or audited. Meaning, you know the time of completing a certain transaction or a certain job as part of the total task, and the total time involved in performing the total task. And like I said, if you have to be responsive to a complaint, there has to be a standard about that. And if you are transferring one part of the task to another division of the operations, there has to be a certain time limit for that. Now, after having given these examples to you, I think coming up with hard standards should not be difficult for you people. If you start imagining different kinds of service, you can very easily come up with the hard standards which should be defined from the customer's point of view. It is the soft standards which are a little tricky, and those are the ones which cannot be measured or audited. Now the question is, if those cannot be measured or audited, how do you go about knowing that standards in the first place are in place, and in the second place to determine that everything has been delivered according to those standards? Well, it is a little tricky and difficult, but we certainly have a way at our disposal. Before that, let me tell you what those standards are, meaning the soft standards. Soft standards are a function of all those quality attributes which I've been talking about. Soft standards basically are a translation of the quality attributes as perceived by your customers, meaning all those quality dimensions as experienced by your customers. And on the basis of those experiences, you come up with those standards. And those standards could be, let me give you the very fundamental example of soft standards. A company might say that our staff has to be responsive, our staff has to be quick. Now, these cannot be standards because these are very vague and abstract. The fact is that soft standards are vague and abstract. How do we translate these soft standards into something more measurable or into something which can be measured numerically is going to be the continuation of my discussion in the next lecture, because we're running out of time. And therefore, let me give you a summary of the lecture which I have given you today. I basically started talking about the motivational model of the job characteristics, on the basis of which we define the different jobs, and we develop the ability to see the level of motivation jobs forming different tasks offered to the employees working for the company. And on that basis, we are in a better position to manage those employees, because we can better define those positions and we can better adjust those positions the way I just explained to you guys, with the help of simplification, enlargement, or enrichment, and so on and so forth. And once we are done with the job design, we get into the standards, and the standards are the ones which must be defined from the customer's perspective. As a matter of fact, experts say that standards have got to be customer defined, and customers define those standards when they start talking with a company, either in terms of their satisfaction or dissatisfaction. And mostly those points which are the basis of dissatisfaction go into the quality index, and companies start considering those very seriously as standards. And standards are of two different kinds: hard standards and soft standards. Hard standards are the ones which can be measured and audited, because those are things which are observed very easily. And soft standards are the ones which are very abstract, because those are the translations and representation of the perceptions of your customers. And that is something which I'll be talking about in the next lecture. Thank you very much for your attendance, and Allah Hafiz until then.